Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be speaking to you all today about one of my favourite things, which is staying organised. Whilst my love of organisation might be a little bit sad, it's also a very important topic to be talking about at the start of your PhD and beyond. But I appreciate that it might not be your favourite task, so let's start with some myth busting. Myth number one, I need to be naturally organised to effectively manage my time. For some of you, keeping your work organised might be something which happens without too much effort, but for others, you might feel like you're fighting a losing battle to stay organised. Thankfully, everyone can learn to implement time management techniques. And the aim of this presentation is to give you some of these methods, so it no longer feels like you're having to fight against the chaos all day long. Myth number two, if my diary and notes aren't beautiful, they aren't keeping me organised. A simple search of bullet journal in Pinterest will either give you a serious notebook envy or strike the fear of God into you. So let's get this straight. Your organizational methods should be functional before they become aesthetic. Your notes might be beautiful, but if they aren't serving their purpose, they aren't helping you at all. Don't get me wrong, I am a fan of color coding, and if you're one of those people gifted with stunning handwriting, which I am not, you should definitely embrace that, but only if your notes are doing their job too. And finally, I'm better off just doing the task rather than wasting the time on planning. Some of you might be thinking, I could definitely be using this planning time to start my experiment or read that article or write a paragraph of my literature review. It's certainly a fair point that I don't want you to procrastinate your PhD by over-organising. However, taking time to plan will save you hours on the task because it allows you to allocate time in a fair and well thought out way. It will help you to foresee issues, and it will prevent procrastination and enable you to reach your goals. So why am I here today speaking to you all? Well, you might be feeling a little bit like this at the start of your PhD. You've just started your project, you're finding your feet, you've realised you've got quite a few different aspects of work and life to manage and balance. And you've discovered your PhD isn't quite as simple as introduction, lit review, chapters 1 through 3, conclusions, for example. PhDs are multi-layered, multifaceted, multidimensional, living, unpredictable, erratic balls of chaos. And when I was where you are 4 years ago, I was so confused. And whilst I cannot claim to have ever had it under control, and I did get it wrong often, I at least know now how to tame that ball of chaos a little to allow myself breathing space to think about the actual content of my thesis and the science which is at the heart of my project. And that's what I'm here to help you with. So let's start with the basics. Firstly, implement your organizational strategies now, because final year version of you will be incredibly grateful that you did. They'll give you a solid foundation to work from. Try out different methods and combinations and see what works for you. I'll give you tons of ideas today, but please don't do them all. Think of it as an organizational buffet. And finally, don't be afraid to switch things up if it stops working. As your PhD morphs and adapts, so too should your strategies for managing it. So let's get set up. Filing systems. Love them or hate them, you're going to need one. The way I do this is to sort my files from the most frequently used to the least frequently used and group them under different categories. You can see that I have one for my actual thesis writing, one for each of my PhD chapters, a category for my study site, one for my admin, etc. Don't laugh at how I do this by numbering my folder names. I know this is highly unsophisticated, but it works for me. Make good use of subfolders under these, but don't go too crazy with folders. There's a fine balance between having too few and too many. I know that many of you will have or will soon learn about the importance of file naming in the data management course, but to reiterate, decide on a file naming template and stick to it, always making it clear what version that you're working from. The file name that I have up here has all the information I need to know about what's inside, so I don't have to keep opening these data files to find out what's in there. Next up is notebooks. Number one rule of notebooks is new project, new notebook. This doesn't mean I'm telling you to hop onto Amazon every time you have a new idea, but you'll want to keep each significant chunk of your work separate. There are benefits to keeping your notebooks digital or having a physical copy. In reality, you'll probably use both for different reasons. If there's a particular diagram or set of notes that you know you'll want to access often and you work in different places, I suggest scanning those pages and inserting them into a digital notebook. Besides the obvious meetings, diagrams, notes, I also use my notebooks for conferences because I need to keep notes to keep myself awake, and because I can refer back to them if someone says, oh, I think they mentioned that at a conference in 2021. Now let's think about spreadsheets. Now, these aren't just for data, so please don't panic if you're a non-scientist and Excel is a sort of entity you want to avoid. They can be really useful tools, and all you need is a few very basic skills on Excel. Funded or self-funded, the first thing you're going to want to do is set up a spreadsheet for your budget. This should itemize the cost, item, event, date of purchase, and date of use, mostly for train tickets and flights, plus the budget it has come from, if you have different grants, funding sources, or budget codes that you're accessing. I also itemize these extra pots of money in my budget spreadsheet so that I can see at any point exactly how much money I have. And I can also send this directly to my supervisor if he wants to see it at any point. From here, you can create pivot charts to show the breakdown of your spending and can help keep you keep the balance between different aspects of your project to make sure that one chapter is not absolutely draining your budget while the other one is being underfunded. Spreadsheets are also really helpful as progress trackers. This is a very intense slide, but bear with me. When I was writing my thesis, I created this top spreadsheet here to keep a track of all the sections I needed to write, as well as making sure that I submitted my data sets to the right places. I cross-referenced my sections to other chapters, and I formatted everything correctly. I also used a prioritization technique, which I'll talk about in a later slide. So you see, I do all the A tasks first, and I do the B tasks and C tasks, and so on. I used the bottom spreadsheet, which I think is uglier personally, but it still did the job, to motivate a part of my lab work, which had a disgusting level of 53 separate stages, and I did it on 120 samples. But you can use this kind of idea to track your reading or your data collection or your interviews. Set up a little progress bar in the corner so you can see how far through you are. The time that this turned fully green and went to 100% was a very happy day for me. Okay, so you're all set up with the basics. And now you start getting given or giving yourself tasks to complete. How do we deal? First up, it's everyone's least favorite app, email. Firstly, it goes without saying, but get that folder structure set up ASAP. And if you can, match it to the file structure on your computer. This makes it much easier to become familiar with where everything is stored. My number one rule for managing your inbox is to aim to hit inbox 0 every day. I know this might seem like a pipe dream, but that is the easiest way to make sure your emails don't build up, you don't miss anything, and you get to feel super smug. Here's how I do it. If a useless email arrives in your inbox, and we all get them, mark it as read and then delete it. Be ruthless. If an email arrives that doesn't require any action from you, but it's useful to save, pop it straight into the right subfolder. If an email arrives and there's a task in it which takes less than 2 minutes to complete, do that task right away and then file the email. And finally, if an email arrives and it requires some action which takes longer than 2 minutes, put that email on your to-do list and then file the email until you need it. Don't use your inbox as a to-do list. It will get out of control really quickly. And that brings me nicely onto to-do lists. Everyone has their own way of doing this, but I generally split mine into two: an electronic long-term to-do list, which covers long-term goals and deadlines and allows me to keep track of them, and a short-term to-do list in a notebook, which I use to assign my tasks weekly. It might seem pretty obvious, but you can edit your digital lists, but it's much harder to edit a physical copy. This has two implications. Firstly, don't use your long-term list to store tons of small steps because you'll end up deleting them as they change. And secondly, write down everything that you don't want to do on a piece of paper in pen and use that as the motivation to get those tasks done. Every week, I use my long-term list to decide what small tasks I need to complete in order to move each project along. You can see here that I sometimes do use a daily list, but I do prefer a weekly list because it takes the pressure off you achieving every single day. For example, if you feel unwell, and if it also allows you the flexibility if something urgent crops up and you'd assigned a task for a Tuesday, but an email drops into your inbox on Tuesday morning, you can sort of not have to move things around between days because you know this is just stuff I've got to get done this week more generally. And if something doesn't get done, it rolls over to the top of next week's list. And the final section of my presentation today is managing your time. Long term, I find the best way to manage your time is via a Gantt chart. Your school or institute might encourage you to make one of these as part of your progression reviews in the summer. Love them or hate them, and most of my friends hate them, although I love them. Gantt charts are a great way to visualize what your priorities are going to be during different months. But don't worry if you don't stick to it. They will change and adapt with your PhD and when new deadlines come up. This is more of a reassurance that you're on track and also a way of keeping your eye on the finish line. And possibly the most powerful tool in your arsenal is your diary. Again, these can be digital or physical. I used to be a physical diary kind of person, but I found that things moved around so much that I needed to switch online to stay flexible. Diaries allow you to visualize how you're using your time, and I suggest making use of color coding options here to see at a glance if you aren't getting your balance between tasks quite right. If you find yourself working in different locations, try using all-day events to block out your time. You can see that on the Wednesday of this week, I was working from Circ, and the rest of the time I was working from home. This is also a great place to store Zoom links, room information, meeting minutes, and other key pieces of information which are specific to an event. It's a slightly controversial topic whether you should use your work diary to also keep track of your social life and personal admin. I find that two diaries makes things very confusing for me, so I tended to keep everything in one place during my PhD. But as I move into the world of work now, I'm going to try and create a bit more work-life separation, and it's up to you where you draw that line. I also thought this might be a useful place to mention a few productivity techniques which can help you to manage your time. The first up is prioritization by urgency. On your to-do list, put a number 1 next to the most urgent tasks, and then number 2, and then number 3. Then do all the number 1 tasks, and the number 2 tasks, and the number 3 tasks until your list is complete. You saw this on my massive writing spreadsheet where I had A tasks, B tasks, C tasks, etc. Eat that frog, it's a very strange name, but it means to do the task that you dislike first thing in the morning. So for me, I dislike writing the most, which is not great for a PhD student, but it is my life. So I always write first thing in the morning and then leave the more fun tasks for later in the day, knowing that I've kind of done the most difficult thing and everything else is going to be sort of an easier ride. For you, it might be your email or your lab work or your reading. Body clock means that you take notice of when you are best at certain tasks. So I'm really good at data manipulation and analysis in the afternoons, but not so great in the mornings for some reason. So I always allocate my time based on when I feel I do the best work. Time blocking leads on from that. That means you set aside a certain number of hours to work on a project and you don't do anything else in that time. This is one that lots of big CEOs will use to manage their calendar. You can use timers, or I quite like ambient study music on YouTube, if it helps you to stay focused on that task. And finally, Pomodoro, which is essentially working at intervals and taking strict defined breaks. I am personally not a huge fan because I enjoy what's called deep work, where we focus on a task for a couple of hours, but lots of people find that working in these very short bursts helps their productivity. That brings me to my take-home messages. Firstly, keep it simple and logical. Don't overcomplicate the process. It should be a support, not a time drain. And remember that I've had 4 years more time to figure things out. So if you look at my spreadsheets and my diary and you think, don't panic, you will develop your own personal systems. And I bet by the end of your PhD, they'll be better than mine. Think about tasks on different scales, daily, weekly, monthly, seasonally, yearly, and don't forget to check in on your long-term goals. And finally, I hope I've given you a good spread of options here. So experiment and see what works for you. Thank you for your time today, and I wish you all the luck in the world with your PhDs and staying organised.